Look out, villains! These hands are registered weapons. Hi everyone, welcome back to another Scotty Karate video. Today we're going to be going over the, what's the word I want to use? Myth that martial artists have to register their hands as lethal weapons. That on today's episode of... So, there's a myth out there that when you get your black belts, or if you've trained in anything, you have to register your hands as lethal weapons with the state or the government. Is it true? No, not even a little bit. But if you haven't heard this theory or this mantra that people say, there's a few reasons why and where it comes from. Let's start with what it is. If you haven't heard it, it is simply, once you become a black belt, you then have to fill out a form for the government or the state, send it in, they register you as a lethal weapon, they send you back a card that you keep in your wallet to show the police in case you're needed to, they ask you for it. No. None of that's true. Now, why? Well, there's a few different things. One, I'm going to glance over it. It's unconstitutional. But, outside the fact. Now, these myths and these stories got super prevalent. And I still hear them today. But when I was young, 90s, early 2000s, when I was training super heavy and I was in multiple dojos, I heard this all the time. Where, you got to a certain rank and you had to register. And it wasn't just martial arts. It was anyone who has had any military service whatsoever had to register. Because they've had military training, which means they know close combat. They knew, the Army's martial art. They know the Marines, what have you. Then it got everybody who's ever trained ever. So, for example, it got to the point where I would hear people say this to me before I was a black belt. They'd be like, what rank are you? And I'm like, I'm a orange belt. Say 2 or 3 ranks in. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, have you registered yet? Registered what? Like, you have to register your hands as lethal weapons. You had, a year of training. You have to register. No, you don't. But you'd be surprised at how many people truly do think this. Not like, I heard this once, but they really do think that either you have registered or you need to because you're going to get in trouble if you don't. Kind of like having, you bought a gun without serial number. You have to, no, that's not how it works. So, let's cut back a little bit. Where did this come from? Well, there's a few different stories. I'm going to tell you some anecdotal and I'm going to tell you probably the truth. Like I said, because there's so much out there and speculation of where it actually began, I'm going to tell you what I personally heard and then what my research has driven up, right? What I've gotten from it. First thing I heard is it originated in boxing gyms in around the 70s. So, apparently, it was a big scam. And so what people did is they'd go in and they'd train in boxing, and after so much training, the boxing gym, federation, whatever that you were subscribed to, told you were so good that you now had to register with the state because your hands are lethal. Now, here's the problem. A lot of these places actually charged people to do this. So it wasn't like a form they handed them. They did the work for you. You don't have to worry yourself. We'll take care of it. So what they did is they took the person's information down, all their stuff. They sent it in. And they received a card back and handed them the little certification. Just a card, it depends on what story you're hearing. And once they receive that, now they're registered. They have proof of registration. Now, I've actually been to places that actually had it on the wall, in a frame, their registration, saying that they are registered with the state or the government as a lethal weapon. You know instantly that place has no real credibility just by that alone. So they might be very skilled. They might be former champions in, say, boxing. But if they do this to you, this is a scam. Okay? It's a scam. They charge people for this. No one registers you for free. I've never heard of it. I've never heard once. They're like, oh yeah, I was registered. How much did it cost you? Nothing. No. They usually charge you. And what they'll do is they'll charge you the fee, like $100 to have you registered. All you did is pay them $100 for a piece of paper they printed out in the back on their printer. It is a scam. I've heard a lot about martial arts, right? Now that one I think has some validity. Not as real. It's not real. You do not have a certification somewhere sitting that proves that you're a lethal weapon because you're a black belt in karate. It's not real. If you have one, you got scammed. I'm sorry. But what happened is this myth got pressed because people like to use the phrase, I warn you, I'm a black belt. Don't mess with me, I'm a black belt. What I understood it to be is it started off with people trying to avoid fights. You know, you're at the bar, somebody's mouthing off, kind of touching you, getting in your space, what have you. And then they feel obligated for whatever reason. In my experience, it's because somebody told them they had to. But they feel obligated in some way, shape, or form to say, I'm a black belt in karate. I'm warning you. And I think in their heads, what I've understood, people that actually say this have told me, is that they think it's going to be their get-out-of-jail-free card. Kind of like if you really F their world up, but I warned them. Where did this come from? Well, from what I understand, it actually came from the 60s. Earlier than I was told. So, or the stories I heard anyway. So what apparently happened is when in the 60s, soldiers were stationed in Okinawa. While they're there for an extended amount of time, they're bored, there's nothing to do, so they decide to go and train martial arts, train karate, for example. They go in, they train karate. Now, in Okinawa at the time, they did make you register. So what that means is the police in Okinawa wanted to know if you had martial art training, you had karate training. That was for their safety, because, don't know if you know this, they aren't packing a lot of heat in Okinawa. So that was for their safety. So they understood when they talked to someone or tried to arrest someone, if they had martial arts experience, they knew that they were probably going to have to fight a martial arts, so they can adjust accordingly. So they did have to register. The next part of that is the military made the people, the Marines, the people stationed, register with them. Tell them that they're training. And why? Don't know. Don't want to get into speculation. But they were asked to make sure that I'm training here. Now, with that being said, they now come back to the United States. They now have this mentality that I had to register. And then that kind of unfolds and just spreads that myth that you have to do it here. It's never been a law. From my research, and I've actually asked some lawyers about this, it's not a law. It's never been a law. And it's actually got basis. It's unconstitutional to be a law. Now, all that aside, okay, keep it focused, Scott. Keep it focused. This is a myth. It's always been a myth. It's continuing to be a myth. The origin story, honestly, doesn't really matter. I've heard, like I said, two different ways. I've personally heard my own experience, my childhood growing up, being into martial arts, being in dojos. I've heard it multiple ways. And in my research, I find out something different. That is driven from the military stationed in Okinawa in the 60s. Fantastic. Does it matter? Not really. It's neat to know. Now you know. And knowing is half the battle. To finish things up, I've always found this registering as kind of a joke anyway. Because, well, martial arts use their feet. Do I need to register my feet? What if you do Muay Thai and your main attack is your elbows and knees? Do you have to register them? You know what I mean? Like, what if you're a jiu-jitsu practitioner and you do tons of hip throws? You have to register your hip? Like, it's so absurd. And that's why it evolved. It's no longer you have to register your hands. you had to register you as a lethal weapon. It's so funny, but it is one of those major karate myths or martial art myths that just is everywhere. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that has heard of it at least, but some that have their certifications. I honestly, I feel bad for them because they got duped. But what do you think? Have you heard about this? Do you know anyone who actually has a certification that they can pull out and go, boom, I'm registered? Please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you like the video, please like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell in the corner so you know when my videos are posted each week. And as always, the more you train, easier the fight.